We're just going to wait a few minutes until we get people situated in the room. Hi, Darlene. Welcome. Beverly from Philadelphia. Simone, welcome again. Hi, Martha. Hi, Michael. Jillian. Hey, Judith. Hi, Della. We are so happy you could all be with us. So good morning and welcome to our third Salon, the very first of 2021. Happy 2021 to everyone. The Maternal Gift Economy Breaking Through series is hosted by the International Feminists for the Gift Economy and Genevieve Vaughn. I'm Letitia Layson, your moderator. We are thrilled to have Jodi Evans and Sherri Mitchell with us today. Both our guests will speak, followed by a Q&A. Genevieve will be available for Q&A also during that time. So check the bottom of your screen for the Q&A icon. That's where you're going to enter your questions. We'll have two lovely women, Judith and Liliana, who will be watching for those. The chat box is going to remain open during the talks, but if it's distracting to you, remember you can close that down so you can focus on our speakers. We're going to be together for the next few hours. Please remember to take care of your bodies, the needs that you have to stretch, move around, feed yourself, hydrate well. Today's salon is going to be recorded and will be available for viewing on our website, the maternalgifteconomymovement.org. So thank you so much. And we look forward to seeing these two incredible women. Our first speaker is Jodi Evans. She's a lifelong peace and social justice activist and co-founder of Code Pink, Women for Peace. She was in Jerry Brown's cabinet when he served as governor of California in the 1970s, ran his Senate campaign in 1982, and his revolutionary 1992 campaign for president. She has led citizen diplomacy, delegations to Iran, the Gaza Strip, Yemen, and Afghanistan, and has published 2 books, Stop the Next War Now, Effective Responses to Terrorism, and Twilight of Empire. She founded a campaign at Code Pink, cultivating a local peace economy to address the need to change culture from a war economy culture to a peace economy culture if we want to achieve peace and justice, to a giving, sharing, caring, thriving relational economy from an extractive, destructive, and oppressive economy. So without further ado, let me present to you Jodi. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you so much, Letitia, and I'm going to share my screen. So I come to you from Tongva lands on the west coast of Turtle Island. And I want to thank you, Diane, Letitia, and Jen for holding the space for this conversation today. revolutionary New Year's wishes to all of you as we begin again in 2021, where truly hindsight is 2020, if we choose to use it. The work of cultivating a local peace economy is rooted in regeneration and renewal. So here we are together at a time where we ritually renew. But I'm with Gramsci, who wrote on January 1st, 1916, I want every morning to be New Year's Day. I want to renew myself every day. So I hope we take this path and make every day a day of renewal, review, and regeneration, because there is not enough iteration in the war economy. It wants to lock us into step and repeat pattern that makes us a slave. I'm a peace activist, but a few years ago, I realized I was not going to end war until I could end the war economy, as war just served the war economy, the extractive, destructive, oppressive economy, which was killing me, my community, and life on the planet. In 1974, I went to London for E.F. Schumacher's New Economy Conference and have long been influenced by Genevieve Vaughn's maternal gift economy work. But now I saw how this fits into my work as a peace activist. Here we are trying to end war while sucking literally at the tit of the war economy, thinking it was giving us life. The system is so encompassing, literally the water we swim in, like the pot of water with the frog boiling to death, looking so fat and happy. How to get out of the water, how to build an ark to take us through the flood of the war economy was creating. I look at what climate change is doing, the global economy, and see it as this flood that we've seen in all cultures. And in building a local peace economy, it is building an ark. I turned my attention to the peace economy, the giving, sharing, caring, thriving, resilient, relational economy with which none of us would be alive. I repeat, without which none of us would be alive, as Jen teaches us every day. It became clear that everything that actually nourished conditions for life was constantly being degraded, denied, destroyed, devalued, and privatized. But we all continue to put our values towards structures that are killing us. The war economy, a monster that takes everything into itself. I watch it in activism. I watch it in my community. It leaves us with the illusion that that is all there is, but we know better. We've seen all kinds of systems change over time. And once we are aware that it is killing us, it is time to turn around and create what sustains life. Easily said, but it's a structure. It is strong. It has weapons. It has money. It has control. It has power. It is hegemony. It controls the narrative. It defines the values. And if you don't agree with it, you are marginalized and thrown out. Now, I prefer to be out than in and live as much as possible outside the culture of war. But I also have habits I have to break, patterns that have become who I am. And to let go of patterns and habits, we have to practice new ones. This feels overwhelming to many because we are all overwhelmed in our lives. And many of us are along the spectrum of where we enter this story, what our habits are and how they have become us. I'm excited to hear from Sherri later, as her life has been in a community closer to the values that nourish and respect all life. So I'll talk more about the divest part, as she knows much better than I, the path to peace and the connection to life. Most of us in modern culture have lost the respect and value for life, not in our minds, not in our hearts, but in our behaviors. Not our fault. The connections have literally been pulled away from us in our most vulnerable moments. Moments where our choices were not obvious or in reach. And those of us who are white, the hubris and stupidity and violence of our ancestors laid this barren soil for us. If we want to take responsibility and move forward as ancestors who do not perpetuate cycles of violence upon future generations, and who are planting seeds to nourish life for all our relations, we must divest from the war economy and recognize our choices and what consequences and violence they result in. The constant whittling away of connection to Earth and that which is actually of value has left a gaping hole in our beings, which leads to more addiction, to what brings us to death instead of life, a cycle of violence internally and externally. But at Cook Pink, we say the only recognizable feature of hope is action. We are coming out of a year of pause, where what is violent to life was exposed and what is essential became super clear. One of the patterns of nature is to slow down to speed up. So I feel that 2021 offers us an opportunity to speed up the cultivation of the peace economy, as we got so many lessons in 2020. One of the hardest parts about letting go and practicing new patterns is that we need to take the time to grieve the loss of all that we have given of ourselves to the inferno of the war economy. Plus, it's our communities. 2020 gave us time to grieve and time to see so clearly what was upside down. With the time to grieve, we also need time for forgiveness and acceptance, and take what is learned as the compost for what we want to grow. For me, moving from the war economy to the peace economy is about moving deeper into love. And as long as we do, love brings up everything that isn't love to be healed. We have been through so many years of this war economy that healing has to be ever present. Greed has always been around, but the war economy weaponized it. Doubt also arises when we don't know which way is up, when the path does not have stones yet, when the muscles we need to move forward are great ideas, but absent from our capacities. To confront doubt, I have my tuning fork, my roots and my North Star. I think Sherri will be giving us a tuning fork later, but we must all have one. What do you attune to? When we are lost and when the war economy wants to take the ground from under us, we have to have the way we find to home, to heart, to what it is that we are in the process of cultivating and creating. You know, we're stepping out of the war economy into cultivating new, but really old patterns of living. And having that North Star, that tuning fork, that's invaluable for our path. My tuning fork is creating conditions conducive for life. I'm here to serve a more just, beautiful, joyful, and peaceful future that is connected to the feminine and the earth. Each act I do paves that way. The war economy thrives on us being unrooted. Find your tune or your root. What are you committed to? Embrace that commitment. It's your path out. I find one of the hardest things for most is beginning again. Remembering that all things start with a small step. When you start, also all the war economy patterns throw themselves against you. Being able to step back and really witness and listen to how you can offer yourself to the needs of what is closest to you, what arises in the relationship to your community. Small tasks give breadth to vision, and the next true relational regenerative step will flow from each small step, each small task, if it's guided by your commitment. I can promise you magic happens here. Beyond, like, anyone who's doing it's beyond their wildest dreams. Things just appear. And I say that about the gifting economy. when introducing people to it, and they come back and they say, oh my God, and there was so much gifting here and so much gifting there, and somebody just did, it's like, it's always there for us, but we're distracted from it. And we're distracted from what's true and what this economy that is always holding us. And certainly we're not very grateful for it, or those that hold it for us. We've also lost trust that we know inside of us how to create conditions conducive for life because of that distraction. We've just been distracted from ourselves. 2020 showed us how little is actually essential and how much of our time was consumed by the war economy and the unnecessary. We are not in this alone. We do nothing alone. We are all connected. But to take this path, we need community. We need to remember what it is to be in community, what it is to be a responsible, respectful member of a community. And to break war economy habits, we need a loving community to help us see past what feels normal into a new way of being. Which reminds me, people are thinking with the vaccine, we can go back to normal. One of all of our tasks is to remind people how violent and oppressive what was called normal. Normal is that warm water holding that frog. We are setting out to cultivate a new world and not going back. Our days are going to be filled with the new, the fresh, and instead of letting it give you anxiety, let it give you energy and excitement. Unfortunately, too much of our culture is also created from the war economy. Unpacking ourselves from the narrative of the war economy is huge. And one of the places you can have a lot of fun finding what is the lie that you see. So obviously that becomes your task to help everyone out of that lie. And unpacking I engage in every day is peace and security do not come from weapons, cops, and war. And you would be surprised how often that arises in a conversation that I can include myself in and leave people wondering. So you find where you see the common narrative of the war economy that everyone's agreeing with, but you know is a lie, and make it your daily practice to disrupt it. So to lay the path forward, we must first take a look at the patterns that empower the war economy and practice our way out. I have 21. If you come up with more, which I'm sure there are many, please share them with me, because being able to name something is the way we can change it. So the war economy thrives on alienation, literally creates alienation so that it can thrive. But we live in a world of connection. We need to witness where we have patterns of alienation. How much time do we spend alone and feeling alienated? And what are our methods of creating connection? Even with COVID, we can be connected. With COVID, literally, we're shown that we're all connected. But connection frightens the war economy. They want to control those connections and filter them, and now own them and manipulate us with them, which continues that sense of alienation. So for me, where I start with connection is Mother Earth. Finding ways to be connected to Mother Earth and to my community. So for you and your community, a great place to start is connecting to Mother Earth. So it's easy to see why we would be alienated as we live in a society that emphasizes the individual achievement over community care. Without our relationships, none of us would be alive. The self is patterned into the war economy, and it is what creates the gap of connection we try to fill. The best way to fill it is to engage with community. One way is to look at where the war economy has most adversely affected those in your community. Find out how they're being served. Show up, listen, learn, and serve. Take every opportunity to be with those who are caring for, creating, and making your community healthier. Make sure to share your gratitude for them. These are those essential workers, so many of whom we are just becoming aware of. Diving deeper into individualism, we see the practice of competition alienates us from each other. Even in our Western theories of evolution, we make nature survival of the fittest when we know we can only thrive and live in interconnection. My friend Naima Pennyman at Hillfire Farms said that when Hurricane Katrina slammed into the Gulf Coast, almost everything lost its footing. Houses were detached from their foundations, signposts and vehicles floated down rivers that became, the streets. But oak tree held its ground. How? Instead of digging its root deep and solitary into the earth, the oak tree grows its roots wide and interlocks with other oak trees in surrounding area. And you can't bring down 100 oak trees bound beneath the soil. So I love to see that the interconnections I have with my communities and the communities of my community are what keep me standing in the force of the war economy. The major waves that hit us daily. We also need to catch ourselves in the patterns where we find ourselves in competition instead of collaboration and cooperation. Transactional to relational, wow. This one's, I watch it just scare people, how much it is ingrained in us that we don't even understand. Many of our relationships have been converted to monetary transactions, all in the name of efficiency. We've become so accustomed to paying cashiers and servers for groceries and restaurant meals that we barely recall what we used to grow and the food we used to cook together as communities. We've turned knowledge exchange into transaction by paying experts to write books that we drill into students' minds instead of learning from our own lived experience and the wisdom of our ancestors as we once did. The market-based way of relating carries over into our non-monetized relationships as well. We're thinking, I'll do this if you'll do that. And in our fast-paced society, getting things done is more important than cultivating a real relationship to ourselves and our community and our world. I find people struggle with this one the most, as we are not aware of how transactional we've become. Take a day to watch yourself. Why do you do things? At Code Pink, we see this pattern in our work, using tools to engage, to accomplish something, instead of to relate, learn, and actually engage. So many of the things we use that we think are relational are transactional. Sometimes even work itself is a transaction. We have to pay the bills, even though it goes against our values, even if we know we're being used by the war economy. Relational work, find it. It creates conditions conducive for life. The war economy works overtime to force us into depression and helplessness and hopelessness. The structure continues to destroy and extract our time, our joy, our connections to life and the planet. And it can feel overwhelming. This one is easier for us at Code Pink as our hearts are broken every day by the violence and death the US is engaged in. But we know that our engagement for peace first keeps us out of depression, and then inspires other, and then affects those in power. So watch where you are pulled down or overwhelmed and pivot to engagement, any kind of engagement, even hugging someone, calling someone you love, finding out if where there is a need and engaging. There is so much violence in the world, but when you engage with others, you see the abundance of love, care, and beauty there is, releasing you from apathy. So the war economy is too big. We think too big to fail, but it fails every day. Bigger is better is a lie we live in. More is killing us, literally stressing people to death. The war economy operates on growth and continual consumption, and it rewards those with a big reach, a loud voice, and the money or power to affect millions of people. That culture bleeds into all our beliefs and habits. The war economy devalues small personal acts, but our power to change lies in the strength of our relationships, which could only be measured by their depth. It is all about growing the love between us. The distraction to the big takes us away from what literally creates change, the small acts. Take time to reflect on where the big overwhelms you. I could keep going, but I see time is moving. So I want you to look at them and see, you know, like from either or to both and, from reactionary to investigate, from us versus them to all of us, from limitation to imagination, from restraint to pleasure, from control to empowerment. You know how to define those for yourselves and witness where you fall in relationship to them. From scarcity to abundance, from plastics to the planet, from urgency to wisdom, consumption to creation, accumulation to sharing resources, and repression to revolution. These practices help us to cultivate the future. The day-by-day, step-by-step practice helps us change ourselves in order to change our community, the systems, and the culture. There's what you think and feel, and then there's what we do. What we do is essential to the future. Over the years of doing this, a few of the very first comments are, what does this do to change the system? Well, first of all, it takes one person and a community out of the war economy, out of the violent machine, and it gives that energy and time into creating the experiment we need for the future. If we want to live in a peace economy, we have to cultivate it, create it, raise it, nourish it, feed it, strengthen it. You know, the hegemony of the war economy has never been stronger in my lifetime, and it has never been more obvious to the destruction it wreaks and that it is a failure. The rich have gotten richer than imaginable, and the poor are growing globally, except in China, that just took 900 million people out of abject poverty. Those who have divested themselves as a daily practice and are cultivating peace locally can report that they are more fulfilled than any times in their lives. Love is at the core of their lives, and the projects are exploding out of them, all beyond anything they would have even thought of before. Each step has led them into new territory, and the connections are breathtaking, and the new ideas are birthed in the connections. The place I've seen one of the most thrilling changes is that more and more philanthropists are giving like Jen Vaughn modeled for years. Full-on gifting, no strings attached, moving capital into indigenous communities and communities of color to literally create new ways of living together and new forms of economy. One of the things I noticed when I was a young woman in the 60s is we made everything, our clothes, our food, our homes. We need to go back to making. I chose the word economy because it means making home. We have left the making to others, and the making is what is essential. So to kick off 2021, we are bringing these practices into form by joining with V, who used to be Eve Ensler, at 1 Billion Rising Gardens, and adding our Planting Seeds of Peace. There is so much land that needs attending to in our communities, and so many that need to be fed. To put our hands in the soil and make food together brings us right next to the essentials. The food we need to eat and our need to care for the soil that delivers that food for us. It is regenerative in its lessons. To plant seeds of peace is to bring ourselves, our community, and our practices back to the essentials. We can practice all the things we need to divest from with this simple practice. Planting seeds of peace is also feeding those who don't have food. In 2020, we saw heartbreaking lines in every city across the world. There are people in your community who need food. Who in your community is making sure they are fed? Find them, join them, serve, and be part of that offering. It brings you right up to what is wrong in the world, brings you relational with what you need to be reminded of as you transform yourself, your community, with those acts that build the rich soil to transform the world. Rising Gardens is a defiant call for a revival, restoration, and transformation. Gardens are a compassionate call for peace and justice, because one of the greatest injustices of our time has been the destruction and eradication of Mother Earth, parallel to the ongoing and escalating gender-based violence. Gardens remind us of our enduring connection to life, to each other, and to Earth, which compels us to do everything in our power to protect and nurture life and all that is sacred without doing harm. Growing food in a garden organically, be it in your own indoor garden or a community garden, allows you to feed yourself and your community. Maintaining a garden is an act of resistance because it does the opposite of what the capitalist machinery does. It connects people and communities with the earth. To grow one's own food, to grow beauty in life is a revolutionary in this age of ecological, environmental, societal, and spiritual collapse. Tending a garden, like nurturing our own communities, requires patience, creativity, love, care, attentiveness, persistence, diligence, mindfulness, and commitment. Gardening centralizes growing and giving. It is not about taking or acquiring. Gardens place us firmly and deeply in the art of honoring life, becoming artistic beds of creative resistance. Planting seeds of peace nourishes everyone. To make a garden grow is love. To keep a community alive is love. And always remember, if you have come to help me, you are wasting your time. If you have come because your liberation is bound up with mine, let us work together. Leela Watson, onward to peace, and thank you.
Thank you, Jodi. That was just so beautiful. And I look forward to participating in this 21 days to Divest and the seeds, planting the seeds of peace with you and me. It's very exciting to have you. I just wanted to respond to a question in the chat right now, which is, yes, the recording will be up as soon as possible. And we'll, if you just stay tuned to our website, you'll have that available to you. So from planting the seeds to, and from a war economy to a peace economy, we now have Sherri Mitchell. And, you know, as is appropriate in Indigenous cultures, she will introduce herself in her own language. So I'll not try to muddle through her Indigenous name. I'll let her say that on her own. But Sherri Mitchell was born and raised in the Penobscot Indian Reservation. She received her Juris Doctorate and a Certificate of Indigenous Peoples Law and Policy from the University of Arizona's James E. Roger College of Law. Sherri is an alumni of the American Ambassador Program and the Udall Native American Congressional Internship Program. She also received the Mahoney Dunn International Human Rights and Humanitarian Award for research into human rights violations against Indigenous people. She is a longtime advisor to the American Indians Institute Healing the Future program and currently serves as an advisor to the Indigenous Elders and Medicine Peoples Council of North and South America. She's the founding director of the Land Peace Foundation, an organization dedicated to the global protection of Indigenous rights and the preservation of Indigenous way of life. Prior to forming the Land Peace Foundation, Sherri served as a law clerk to the Solicitor of the United States Department of Interior as an associate with Fredericks, Peebles, and Morgan Law Firm. a civil rights educator for the Marine Attorney General's Office, and as staff attorney for the Native American unit of Pine Tree Legal. Sherri is the author of the award-winning book, Sacred Instructions, Indigenous Wisdom for Living Spirit-Based Change. And she has 3 books that are currently in progress that we'll see, hopefully, in 2021. So without further ado, welcome, Sherri. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Letitia. Kwe, hello, Gwanude, welcome to everyone who's joining us from all over the world. Ndeli wisi wanahamukwasit na jiopa na wapskewi. Pasilda endo nobama kawasus no bana wapskewi nagakakagus niltibayek and Nalita Haziyu and Diane. My name and my language is Wanahamukwasit. My family is Bear Clan from the Penobscot Nation and Crow Clan from the Passamaquoddy tribe at Zibayek. I always joke that I grew up at the Penobscot Nation and all my grandfathers were Penobscot and all my grandmothers except for one were Passamaquoddy, and that we knew we lived in a matriarchal, matricultural community because the language spoken in our homes was Passamaquoddy and not Penobscot. So we followed the grandmothers in that regard. So very happy to be with you here today. I want to thank Letitia for facilitating this conversation, and Letitia is very skillful at holding all the strings. And so she's helped us to hold ourselves together many times when we've come together. And I just really appreciate that skill set that she has. And it's a real gift. And so thank you, Letitia, for that. And I want to thank Diane for helping to manage the technology, which is something that, you know, many of us are still struggling to learn as we go. And of course, I want to thank Jen for bringing us together in this way. And I just want to share a little bit about how I came to be in love with Genevieve Vaughn. I was at one of the many conferences for the Association for the Study of Women in Mythology, and Jen was a speaker there, and I heard her speaking, gosh, this was years ago now, about the maternal gift economy. And as Skajinui Apit is an Indigenous woman who grew up with a strong cultural connection to our ways of being and in a strong family, I knew that what she was saying, what she was talking about existed within our own cultural reality. That it was not, as others were thinking, you know, some amorphous, you know, magical, far off thing, that we actually were living this way of life, what we, you know, our way of life that we refer to as Skajinawe Bamosawagan. And so I approached Jen and I said, you know, I'm really excited by what you're talking about because it really describes our matricultural, matrifocal ways of being. And we began a conversation and have, ever since then, I'm just a huge fan of Genevieve Vaughn and everything that she is trying to share with the world, because she, if you know her history and where she comes from, she's really working with what she's been given in a way that is, you know, taking something that could be very destructive and has been very destructive and turning part of the end product into a rising up of the sanity that's needed to restore us to a place of balanced living. And I'm just so incredibly inspired by how she has lived her life, the ways that she continues to give back, and by all that she has offered to all of us, including holding this space open. So I just a deep bow to one of the matriarchs of our lives, Genevieve Vaughn. Thank you, Genevieve, for all that you do and for all that you are. I certainly appreciate you and love you very much. And so, Diane, are you going to share the slides or should I share the slides?
However you would like.
Okay, how about if you share the slides?
Okay.
Okay, you can go right ahead to the next one. So what we're talking about here, just really to bring us into focus, is looking at a way of being in relationship to the world. It's a pathway, a walk upon the earth. And so Skijinawe Bamasawagan, actually Skijin is a word for indigenous. So that Skijinawe is, the indigenous. Bamasawagan is walking with life. And so when we're talking about this way of life, this way of being, that whole practice that we live by is called Skijinawe Bamasawagan. And to call it a practice is actually insulting. So I want to take that back. It's a way of being in relationship with the rest of life. And so we talk about our first agreement, our first treaty with the creator that we call Kachila Gudawagan is the first treaty that we entered into. And in that treaty, we agreed to live Skijinawe Bamasawagan, to live this way of life that is in balance with the rest of creation. And so everything that I'm going to talk about here today is going to be from a perspective of this way of life, this way of being in relationship with the rest of creation. Okay, next slide. So the talk that the title to the talk that I gave was in Dilnabamuk, Building a Relational Economy. And when we say Pasilda and Dilnabamuk, what we're saying is I offer this for all of my relations. And Dilnabamuk is our relations, our family connections. And so when we end our prayers, when we're talking publicly at the end of that public address, whenever we come together and we gather and we're sharing anything, we always acknowledge that we cannot make a move. We cannot do anything. We cannot give life to anything, whether it be a thought or a breath or an action, without impacting all of our relatives, right? And I have here the two-legged, the four-legged, the winged beings, the beings that crawl and slide along the earth, the plants, the trees, the living earth herself. And, right now we certainly are enmeshed in a very interesting relationship dynamic with the winged beings. If we think about some of the challenges that we're facing right now and that we've faced in the recent past, those things have come to us from the winged nations, from those who have wings and who move across the sky. And so right now we're being taught some very serious lessons about how we're living in relationship with the rest of life by our relatives of the winged nations. And so when we think about, these relationships that we have with the rest of life, we have to recognize that what our relatives in the winged nations are attempting to tell us right now is that we are living in such a way that is upsetting the balance of life. That we are living in such a way that has caused harm to other living beings. One of the stories in our tradition is the story of the first illness. And the nutshell version of that is that in this story of the first illness, we have, as human beings, the youngest species on the planet, which is important to remember in our arrogance that we are the youngest species on the planet, that we have fallen out of step with the rest of creation. And that the animals who in all of our creation stories have played a role in some way in ensuring that we could live, have come together in council to think about what can we do about our younger relatives. They love us very much, right? So they're very concerned about us as the youngest species on the planet. And they call us the children of the earth. because we are the youngest species on the planet. And so the animals come together in council, and they talk about what are they going to do to help the children of the earth to recognize the harm that they're causing, to help them to recognize how their choices are tied to the rest of life, to help them realize that they've walked away from the path of life and they're moving very rapidly along the path of destruction. And if we think about industrialization, if we think about all of these super industrial complexes, such as the war complex, and we look at the amount of destruction that we've caused upon the earth in just the last 150 years, and we think about the entire spans of life, we can see how rapidly we as human beings are leading to the destruction of a creation that has existed for millions of years before we set foot upon this ground. And so the animals decide to give us illness in order to help us to understand the connectivity that we have with the rest of creation. And this illness that comes to us from the animals is not able to be cured through man-made medicine. And so we see some of these illnesses that have come to us from the animals aren't able to be cured. Maybe we can do something to help us to mask or to suppress some of the symptoms so that we don't get as sick as we were getting, but we can't cure them. There's no cure for the common cold. There's no cure for COVID, right? The bird flu, all of these things. After watching humans suffer for a period of time, the plants and the trees start feeling sad for us because they're one of the oldest species on the planet. And they decide to go into council together to talk about what they're seeing. And so they go into council so that they can decide what are we going to do to help these children without taking away the lesson that the animals are trying to teach them. And so the plants and the trees decide that they're going to send a message into the dream space that if the human beings will come back into relationship with the plants and the trees, as Jodi was talking about the planting of gardens, right? If they will come back into relationship with the plants and the trees and will once again learn the language of the land, the language of the soil, then the plants and the trees will teach them how to heal themselves from this illness that was given to them by the animals, because that would show that they're learning the lesson and they're moving back into better relationship with life. And so that happens, and a grandmother comes and she, this is a very long story that's being very, very, very abbreviated. She comes back to the forest and she, over time, demonstrates her sincerity, and the plants and the trees begin to teach her. When she tells her people what has happened, they return back into a living relationship with the natural world and closer to the forests. And the story, as we're told it, we are told that we are the ones who returned. We are the children who returned back into relationship with the earth. And that was our second attempt, our second commitment, our second chance at living Kachila Gudawadan, and living that treaty that we made with creation to live in a certain way. And so when we think about this term, Basilda and Dilnavamuk, it's said, at the end of any type of offering that we have publicly, is a reminder to us of that commitment. It's a reminder to us that we can't make any move at all without impacting the rest of life. And so that's foundational. This is the foundational teaching that is really instrumental when we're talking about a maternal gift economy. We don't look at it as a gift economy. We look at it as a way of being, as a way of life. And so having this foundation for this way of life is critically important, because if you don't understand that interrelatedness, that interdependence, that interconnectivity, then you can't possibly comprehend what follows. So we can go to the next slide. And so this way of life is very mother-centric. This understanding the relationship, the connectivity that we all have with one another is clearly important, but also the mother is at the center of this way of being. And so we look at that in terms of one of the values that I talk about in the book, Wulikimau, which is this sense of harmony, right? It's about living in harmonious balance with what's outside of you, by taking the balance that you've created from within you and putting it forward, which is Kache. And so when we think about that balanced way of being, when we think about living in harmony, again, as Jodi said, it's really about cooperation over competition. And so this way of life doesn't contemplate any type of competition, nor allow for the emergence of any type of competition that determines whether somebody can live or die. And so when we think about the market economy, what the market economy presents to us is a competition that not only takes away the dignity of those who are not the most aggressive and oftentimes violent participants within that economy. It takes away the dignity of those who come to it with more peaceful, more open, loving, sharing perspective, and it steals away their ability to survive. It's very cutthroat. And so when we're thinking about Skitchinaway Bamausawagan, Pasilda and Dolnabamuk, Wulukimawu, looking at this central themes that are connected to all of this, what we're talking about is living in harmony in ways that we know, if we, no matter where we come from, if we study the history, that our humanoid species survived because we learned to cooperate, because we live in community with one another. And because we helped one another facing the challenges that life presents to us. And so we know that cooperation is a natural impulse within us. And cooperation is part of this mother-centric way of being, that we come together and we give to one another, and we share with one another. And there are a couple of stories that are really central to this, and I want to share one of them. I know that time is of the essence here, and I'll try to be quick with the rest of this, but one of the stories that I think is really important is the story about the creation of Gluskabe. And so there are a number of stories about Gluskabe's creation, and if we go back beyond colonization, okay, somehow we lost the slides. I don't know what happened, Diane. So if we go back to the story before colonization, before the imposition of colonial and missionary perspectives on our creation and legends, creation stories and legends in our mythology, what we find is Gluskabe and not Molsum, but Muldoon. So that Mul is essence of the word that relates to the bleeding time of the woman. And so Gluskabe was the masculine, and then you had the balance of Gluskabe's sister, Gluskabe's twin, the feminine aspect, connected. And it's the same with our creator. You have Kachiniwisk, the sacred feminine, and you have Ekchimundo, the sacred masculine. And because we were matrifocal, matricultural peoples, what the missionaries did was they said, okay, we better elevate one of them and then turn that one over time into the masculine singular God. And then, really shift them away and turn them fearful of the other over time. So what they did was they stripped away our language, and then they took Kachiniwisk, that SKW is how it is on the end, and they stripped that away because that was the feminine aspect of it. So Kachiniwisk became Kachiniwis, and Kachiniwis became the male god in the sky, and Ekchamundo, the sacred masculine element, became the devil. And so they shifted those aspects in our stories. And so it's the same with the Gluskabe and Muldoon stories, and how it became Gluskabe and Molsum, and both men. And Gluskabe was the good twin, and Molsum was the bad twin, a black wolf. And so in some early stories, Gluskabe is the truth teller, but then when you get to the missionary stories, he becomes the liar, the great liar. And so the twisted history, what we call the twistery, really shifted those stories. And I think an important demarcation point, which I write about in one of these books that Letitia's talking about, the Women Rise Wild book, that we recognize a transition from the old story to the new story. And I think it's probably one of the most brilliant teachings that our elders left for us, secretly within the story, is that as the missionaries began capturing the story, the way that the elders told it was that, they weren't born of the earth, first as eyes looking out to observe for a long period of time, to learn how to behave upon the earth before they then started getting other parts of their bodies. But they were born out of the mother, and Molsum, the manufactured twin from the missionary stories, who was the black wolf, cut open the side of the mother with his claws and crawled out, in essence, killing the mother. And so what that story tells us as Indigenous peoples is that the adoption of the story of life coming out the side of the body, right? The story of the rib, where woman is denied her place within the birthing of creation. That story is telling us that when we adopt that story of life entering from the side, it kills the mother. It kills the matriarchy and the matrifocal central part of our communities. And so when we are looking at this mother-centric aspect of our traditional ways of being, we have to strip away all of that patriarchal language. We have to start going back to the roots of all of the original words in our language to look at what is the real meaning. My sister, my beloved sister, who some of you know, Mika Mahan, up north, always talks about the story of their creator, Niskum, and Niskum is God. It's Father God, right? Niskum is the holder of all of the eggs. Niskum is the woman. The creator was the woman. And so we know that there is this mother-centric aspect to our ways of being that are really important to what I'm going to talk about next. So go ahead to the next slide. And Letitia, I know you're watching time, and I'm going to be as fast as I can be, which doesn't mean I'm going to be fast, but I'm going to be as fast as I can be.
You're fine.
Okay. And so the other thing that I wanted to talk about, and we have such limited time, so I wanted to talk about woman as sacrifice or symbol. So there are all of these stories within Indigenous tradition where the woman is the sacrifice, and the Corn Mother story is a classic example of that, where this grandmother is she and her husband are talking. She's very sad because the people are starving to death. And she keeps going and she keeps praying and making prayer offerings. And so she goes, and Frank, we have great stories about how our traditions connect to the science, and that's in one of the other books that Letitia was talking about. So please feel free to ask any questions about that in the Q&A. And so, as she's going and she's praying for the wisdom to be able to help her people who are starving to death. Is it a literal starving or is it a symbolic starving? Her husband begins to notice that there's these little green wisps sticking out of her moccasins. And so she gets this message. She knows what has to be done. And so she tells her husband that, she has to be killed, and he has to drag her by her hair until back and forth across the field until all of the soil has been nourished by her body, until there's only bones left. And then the bones, the foundation of her body, needs to be buried there in that field as well. And then from that, the corn rises up and all of the people are fed, and the community is saved. And some people read this as, almost a martyrdom type sacrifice of the body of the woman for the sake of all else, that we have to sacrifice ourselves in order for everyone else to be okay. And how many women have done that throughout history to make that story seem legitimate, right? That's a very patriarchal, very Christian story about the sacrifice of the body of the woman. What that's really trying to teach us is that it is the mothers and the grandmothers whose body of knowledge and wisdom is nourishing to the soil that we grow our future generations in. That is teaching us that it is critical for the people to ingest that body of feminine wisdom in order to be safe, in order to be whole, in order to continue to exist into the future. And so that part also is critical to the creation of what we think of as a maternal gift economy, because it's not the sacrifice of ourselves at the expense of all others. It's a true valuing of this central wisdom of the sacred feminine that's at the core of our communities. That's really important. Okay, next slide. And so this brings us to something that many of you have heard me talk about before, Mama Bizu and Ala Bizu, which is the value of enough. It's the value of having enough. I have enough here right now in my basket, right? I have enough security. I have enough food. I have enough shelter. I have enough medicine. I have enough belonging. I have enough of everything that I need in order to live a dignified life and to have the space necessary for what lives within me, the gifts that I was born for bringing into my community, for them to arise in the fullness of what they were intended to be. And so that's Mama Bizu, that I as an individual have that type of enough. And then we recognize that Ala Bizu, which is everyone has enough, is tied to Mama Bizu. And we learn that at the very beginning through that concept of Pasilda and Dilmamamuk, that we're all connected, right? And so we have this understanding of this value of enough. Like part of my basket of Mama Bizu that makes sure that I have enough, included in that basket is Ala Bizu, which is that everyone has enough, because I cannot be secure within myself unless all those around me are also secure enough to not want to try to grab from me, right? That my sense of security, my sense of safety is dependent on everyone having that sense of grounded security and safety themselves and this sense of dignity. So then next slide. What this brings us to for me is my grandmother's wisdom about reciprocal sharing. And so my grandmother, and to me, this is the gift economy right here in loving action. And so a story that I love to tell about my grandmother, and I still feel like I'm, 5 years old and I'm getting my hat pulled on and my hood tied real tight, and she's talking to me and it's still dark out and it's cold and I just want to be in my bed. And she's explaining to me how I'm going to take this bag of food or this, bag of winter clothes or winter boots or whatever it is that she has on that given day. and I'm going to walk to this person's house, and how I'm going to get there. I'm going to go down the road this way, and I'm going to walk up behind this other person's house through the woods, and I'm going to go and I'm going to put this on their, hang it on their door, and then I'm going to take a pine bough and I'm going to wipe away all of my footsteps all the way back, and I'm going to walk this big circle, this path, and wipe away all my footprints so that they never know where I came from. And I would ask her, you know, over and over again when I was a kid, until I finally understood what she meant. Why don't you just give this to them? You know, why do I have to get up before the sun and go through these extraordinary efforts to try to keep them from finding out that it was you that gave this to them? And she said, because I don't ever want them to feel embarrassed if they see me on the street. And I don't want them to feel like they have to give me something back. You know, so what that does is it creates this sense of security within the community, right? That we know that there is some force out there that is making sure that we have enough, Mama Bisu, and Ala Bisu, because we're all looking out for each other. And that we can live our lives with a sense of dignity, and there's no expectation of a return on what's being given. And so what my grandmother taught me was, you take what you need. She raised 14 children and a couple of her grandchildren. You take what you need so that you're okay, but then you give everything else away. You give everything else away to everyone else in the community so that they can be okay as well. And that wisdom of my grandmother's wisdom, it really teaches us about that sense of dignity that comes with enough. It teaches us about building cohesion within the community, a sense of trust, a safety net that everyone's going to be taken care of equally. Another thing that the community has part of the history is something that they called pound parties. And this is something that you can all do now in whatever community you live in. And so what a pound party was if somebody had a baby, if they got married, if they were going through an illness, if they, you know, lost their home, you know, to fire or flooding or whatever, if they lost their job, the community would call a pound party for them. And every single person in the community would give them a pound of something, a pound of salt, a pound of sugar, a pound of flour, a pound of oats, a pound of beef, right? Everybody would give them something until their whole pantry, their house was filled with all of these things that they needed in order to be okay. That's the modern version of this concept of reciprocal sharing. And that to me is the essence of the gift economy. And so we'll go to the last slide, and this will be the last thing I talk about before I go to the Q&A. Looking at Wajukum Toltina, Wajukum Toltina is the kinship community here that I'm founding in Bunawapskeg territory, where the structure of the community, the governance structure is the clan mothers at the center. The clan mothers at the center give the instructions for all others in the community. They are the decision-making body. So the clan mothers decide how we're going to live. And this models our matrifocal, matricultural governance structures here in Squabanakieg, which is that all the problems go to the clan mothers. The clan mothers sit in circle with one another and they discuss the issue from all different sides so that we can see the whole picture, right? And then once a decision is made that honors the sacredness of life, the instructions are then given to the chief and warriors on how they're going to enact that out in the world. And that's a representation of the sacred masculine and sacred feminine energies, which is not gender specific, right? The sacred feminine is about intuitive heart-based wisdom. The sacred masculine is about manifesting and acting upon that out in the world. It's the marriage between the sacred feminine and the sacred masculine. And our communities were built on that principle. And at the center of that is that intuitive heart-based wisdom of the sacred mother, right? That takes care of everyone else. And so when I was thinking about what it was I wanted to build here at Wajukam Toltina, and Wajukam Toltina translates literally to let's help one another, right? Let's help one another come together. So Wajukam Toltina kinship community is really about helping one another to live in harmony with the earth, to live according to Skijinawe Bamasawagan and Wuli Gamau. So the decision-making body for the community is based on this. And then also what we grow here, because it's going to be an eco community where we're going to have certain medicines, spiritual medicines, and then physical medicines for the body. And also fruits and berries and some nuts and some, limited other things. How we can create mechanisms for taking what we need, just what we need, what we know we're going to need for the community, and then finding ways to give the rest to everyone else. So programs where we bring in young people from the surrounding tribal communities, and we have them pick berries, one for themselves and then one for an elder in the community, and then they have to gift those berries to an elder in exchange for a story, right? And so there's building connection with those elders, and I just use the word exchange, so it's complicated, right? And so. But there's no cost. It's an opportunity for that reciprocal sharing, because it opens a doorway for that elder to share the wisdom that they have and provides a mechanism for it that has been stripped away from the ways that we live with one another. And also teaching the young people the language of the plants and the trees, right? With that story of the first illness. So they then know how to look for in the natural world the medicines that their bodies need in order to be well, but also the medicines that their spirits need in order to be clear and open about how to live in right relationship with Mother Earth. And so all of these things are connected through the work that we're doing at Wajukam Toltina, and this whole way of being down to the very foundational core is really about a matrifocal, matricultural way of being, with a recognition that the wisdom of the mother is the nourishment that our communities need in order to succeed into the future. And so I'm going to stop with that right there, and I'll say thank you very much. And Basilda and Dilma Bamuk, I offer this for all my relations. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sherri. It's just been so beautiful to hear about the stories of your culture. Mama Bizu and Ala Bizu. I just love that whole concept, and a return to that philosophy and structure that we can adopt in all of our lives. The thing that I want to say about this is that both Jodi and Sherri, to our viewers, that they are having us remember what it means to be human. One from an urban Western point of view, and the other straight from inside an Indigenous culture that was Indigenous. And with that, I'd like to check with Genevieve and see if she wanted to offer something, because both of them were talking about the gift in the heart of language, how important it is to begin to divest from war language to peace language, from our language of to reciprocity. So Jen, did you have anything you'd like to offer before we go into questions?
Well, I can say that the very concept of language, or the structure of language, is based on giving and receiving from one person to another. The concept, the gift of the word, and the gift of the situation in the world that we describe. And all of that is based in the unilateral giving done by mothers to babies. And then that's where they learn language, where language comes forth. And we've forgotten that because all of our academic world has never seen the mother, at least the importance of the mothering philosophically, let's say. And we need to get back to that in order to connect with the roots of life and with the indigenous roots and that indigenous people tell us, matriarchal societies tell us, and everyone who is working for peace and for changing the economy and the culture towards a peace culture and a livable culture that won't destroy the earth, which is our mother. So that's what I have to say.
Thank you, Jen. So with that, let's go into the question period. Can we have a question from Liliana? Do you have a question for us for one of the speakers or for all of them? Is Liliana with us?
Can you unmute, Liliana?
Seems like we're having a little trouble hearing from Liliana. We can come back to her. Judith, how about you? Do you have a question for our panelists or Jen?
Judith, can you unmute?
Yeah, okay. Thanks. I have a question. Well, we'll start with a question for Jodi. You talked about the small actions is a good way to start. And I wonder if you could give us an example of an action that either a big one or a small one that you think was effective.
Sure. So I'm just going to start with my personal experience. So I live in Venice, California, and in following my own instructions, looking at where the war economy most affected my community, I discovered that 1,500 homeless kids live in my community from the ages of 15 to 25. And so it was like, okay, what do we do? So I got a bunch of friends together, created a community. We decided that would be the focus. It's not really safe for them in some of the groups that work on homelessness because they turn them in. And so it's not as safe to be young and homeless. So we decided that we would take our cars down to the beach on Saturdays with sandwiches and feed them and start to build trust. And we did that for a while. And then we learned what they needed. And they needed so much. So we found a Baptist church around the corner from me. I talked to the minister and he said on Thursdays, we could have the back of the church and the upstairs, we could have one of the rooms. So we started collecting clothes and started working with restaurants to get coupons, and we got condoms, and it just every week it was a different thing they needed, and then we would put it out to the community and people would deliver it, and then slowly the kids would come because it was safe, and then we had somebody make hot food, and then I got the local clinic to come and give them healthcare because they were all had STDs. I mean, it was like every week it was the next thing. We didn't like the next step, but in the process, we engaged tens of thousands of people in the community of what we needed and what people could show up with. And then we had free counselors on Thursdays. So we had 20 hours contributed each week of counseling sessions. Well, one of those counselors ended up being married to a guy who funded Snapchat. So then they built the building for us on the main street. They now have education, healthcare, clothes. It's become the model for the whole of Los Angeles of how to be with homeless, because it was rooted in love, that these kids are homeless because of the system we live in, and that we always greeted them with love and what can we have to offer. But even way better than that, you know, I live in a community that's really old. It's the oldest Black community in Los Angeles, but it's also like the coolest, hippest, highest, you know, most expensive in some ways. And so, you know, now we have 15,000 homeless who live in our community, and the rich people get really pissed off and they get super angry at me because, like, don't you understand? My kids aren't safe. And it's like, they're homeless. They're in this, you know, like the crazy language of rich people. So we had an election, and LA is run by community, by our neighborhood councils. And in every other neighborhood council, 6,000 people voted. In ours, 58,000 more than vote for president, because they had been engaged, because they love the homeless, because there's more people in this community that understand the situation, that had been taught through this relationship of 1,500 homeless kids that know the homeless aren't your enemy, know they need to be cared for. And this whole group of people that were rich were running on a platform that said, keep Venice safe and secure. And to all of us who know that's like dog whistle for keep the homeless out, we won, and it was beautiful. And just the day we voted, we had to stand in line forever and be together. And so in a city of, you know, 90,000 people, that one act educated, nourished, it nourished the hearts of everyone. And when I, you know, planting seeds of peace and going to find ways to feed people, plant seeds of peace in your own hearts. You know, it's a win-win for everyone. It makes us related and connected in ways that, you know, when we drive by or don't pay attention because we want to be in denial because we're overwhelmed or whatever, it breaks through all of that and connects us. And that's just one example. I mean, another one is Indigenous community that you know, wanted to have a space for itself, and bringing together funders on Lead with Land, and using one example, my example of like saving land, saving Mother Earth that was going to be turned into yet more grapevines, and just letting it be beautiful for the community. 360 acres, and it's like, here, community, use this in any way you want. And in 20 years, I wanted to become a land trust. And in that 20 years, the community made so much beauty in giving, just giving, because it was theirs and they gave to it. It was like being on a biodynamic farm. That energy of love and gift, because no money was changing hands, was profound. And now it's in a land trust for the whole community. And that model has now created some thousands of acres that have been giving into the same land trust, because people can see, they can witness what happens. It is a way better return on investment than money. You know, that the return on investment is life, and its vibrancy, and its love, and its connection, and its community. And I could keep going. I mean, what happens is it just mushrooms, and it gets to this point where I call it at 9 months, it's just like magic happens. And it seems to be like the same amount of time of gestation and birth. But at 9 months, literally something pops. And I've talked to Reverend Barber about it, and he said it's the same with Moral Mondays in North Carolina for him, that it would take 9 months of showing up, you know, as we do every week. And then it would just pop, and you know, what he was able to do in North Carolina, he feels also was rooted in the peace economy. And he uses the war economy and peace economy in his lectures, because militarism is one of the things of the Poor People's Campaign. And so he's adopted the war and peace economy in his work.
Someone asks in the chat, are those stories available to share? Is it okay to share them?
Oh, sure. So we also have a space. Sharing stories is super important. So at Code Pink, 2 times a week, we post a story on Alternet. It's called the Local Peace Economy. You can look up stories on Alternet. And also you can find them on the Code Pink website. But I want to say another thing, that in Lebanon, after the uprising in Lebanon, and they could really recognize that their government was not supporting them, and that it was falling apart, they called on us to grow help them cultivate peace economies in Lebanon and Beirut. When the explosion happened in Beirut, those peace economies were ready for what happened, and they were so connected and so knew how to deliver support, because that's what they were already doing, that in one day they cleaned up all the glass of that explosion, which none of it, the city hadn't even started to do anything. And I can say that that's true in a lot of the places where fires happened a couple of years ago and peace economies arose. They were there this time in spades to help. And in Ashland, where there's a peace economy, they were right away delivering water before the fires were even out to the needs of the people. So in the sense of that, this is a flood in our culture, this is our flood. Building those arcs is how you get through famine, pandemics, fires, all the effects of poverty that we're seeing, and climate change.
Thank you, Jodi. Sherri, did you want to respond to that question? Do you have any input to that, or shall we go to the next question?
I think she did a great job. Let's go to the next question.
Okay, so Liliana.
Sorry, Liliana's not with us. I have a question for Sherri from our friend Constance Tippett. Tell us how your land and house are progressing.
The land has been progressing here for millions of years. So I think that's a good job. I don't need to really help with the progress of the land. The house is coming together. It's it's a slow process, but that's the least of my worries right now. And what I really find interesting, I think, because this is part of this coming together, is forming this circle of grandmothers that's going to be part of the governing body here. And the first gathering that we're planning here is going to be a gathering of women. And I have already seen a gathering of women where we're bringing in women from all corners of the world here. So I'm excited for that to come to fruition when we can gather again. But the thing that I think is really interesting, the question that I saw that I think is really interesting is one from Judith that asked, how can we begin to heal our mothers? And so when I'm thinking about how are things progressing here, that's part of that progress, is how are we healing our mothers to sit in this council? How are we healing our mothers to take away their fear of us rising up wild in our magnificence, and let them let go of all of the things that they have been not only indoctrinated with, but conditioned to believe through trauma. So it was mothers and grandmothers and aunties and daughters the world over who were sacrificed time and time again on the altar of patriarchy. And, were entrained and conditioned to believe that being who they were naturally meant to be as representations of the sacred feminine was something that would cause them to be horribly abused, punished, cast out. Women who questioned the status quo were burnt at the stake. They were drowned. They were put into insane asylums. They were involuntarily sterilized in my territory until the early 1980s. And so when we deal with this aspect of bringing together a maternal gifting economy, we have to bring back, the first gift has to be returning to the mothers their understanding of who they are as sacred beings. And part of that is acknowledging that what has happened has been a distortion of truth, that what they've experienced and the trauma that they've felt as a result of that experience in their bodies is very real. And so there's a story that I've been telling for a couple of years now that connects to our understanding of quantum entanglement, where we recognize that the things that we're feeling in our bodies are a representation of all of the harm that has been done over time. And so not only to us as human beings, but the harm that human beings are causing to other beings in the natural world. And it's the same for those who have been so damaged by the patriarchy. And that includes the mothers. That my mother was terrified of who I was until I was probably in my 30s. And then she apologized tearfully for trying to suppress who I was. And she still talks about, the courage that I have to be out here doing the stuff that I do. But she has not found within herself the courage to shatter some of those stereotypes that she's holding on to that are rooted in trauma. And so we have to deal with that, but it's not just our mothers who need to be healed. I had this experience in ceremony one time where we all get up in the morning. We were in ceremony for a specific period of time, number of days in the bush. And we wake up every morning and do sunrise ceremony and have prayers to start the day. And we were in the mountains in the west, and it was the middle of the summer, and it snowed on us. And it was cold, and I did not want to get out of my bed. I did not want to go to sunrise ceremony. And our relatives slightly to the west of us here, the Haudenosaunee, their sunrise prayer could last for 3 hours, depending on who's saying it. So I was praying really hard that it wasn't going to be their turn to do sunrise ceremony that day, because I just wanted to go back to bed. And so I got there, and they did a real quick prayer, and then they said, okay, all the women can go back to bed. We're going to do men's ceremony this morning. And I was like, thank you. My prayers have been answered. And I bundled up, like this, but with a much bigger blanket. And I was like, okay, I'm going to go back to bed. And I got just to the end of the ceremonial space, and I was like, oh, geez. And I felt really committed to staying there and praying for the men, for the healing of their hearts and their minds. And there's a big, long story associated with this, but what came up for me at that time was, while I was sitting there praying for these men, is that we're never going to be able to be who we're meant to be as women. We're never going to rise up as a full representation, regardless of the gender of our bodies, of the sacred feminine. We're never going to rise up as that representation of the sacred feminine that we have within us, unless that sacred masculine is giving back to those who are identifying as men. And so, we need to have that healing for not only the mothers, but for all those who mother, which includes the fathers. And so we need to acknowledge the trauma that has been inflicted upon them. We need to be able to talk about it. We need to be able to talk about how it prevents us from seeing one another, because it creates this illusion that clouds our vision. And even when we want to come together in a good way, we can't, because of the trauma that we're carrying. So I think that we need to, also be willing to sit in the decay. We need to be able to sit in all of the, the messiness of the birthing, right? It's not, we're birthing this new way of being collectively. We need to be able to be in that birthing fluid, and begin the process of slowly wiping off what has been birthed, to clear the eyes, to clear the airway so it can take a full breath, so that the voice can emerge, right, of what we're birthing together. And I think that, in order for us to do that, our sense of healing has to also be balanced, because mothers don't just clear the airways and wipe the eyes of their daughters. They clear the airways and they wipe the eyes of their sons as well.
Thank you, Sherri. That's so true. You know, a true matriarchy, as defined by Heidi Gutner Abendroth, who will be with us at the next Salon, is an egalitarian society. And there are no favorite children of the mother, one of my elders told me. The goddess, there are no favorite children of the mother. So with that, thank you for all of your words that you shared. And Judith, do you have another question for us?
I wonder if either of the panelists has a question for the other one.
Okay, Jodi, go.
Sherri, thank you so much for all you shared. I have to say, it just felt like nourishment to my heart and my soul, and recognition. And, you know, I was so appreciated the enough. And it just, that was the thing I felt so attuned to, is what would it be to feel enough? And that you have two words that understand both the having of oneself enough, and that knowing that everyone else doesn't have enough, that we're not in a way safe and secure. And it's so much about the war economy that continues to use all of our money to bomb people, instead of creating the enough around the world that would literally make us all safe and secure. How does that manifest in your community? How does enough manifest itself? How do you have practices for that? Or I know you didn't like the word practice, but are ways of being that create recognition of that?
Yes. And, you know, I think that one of the things, I was just talking to some young people, a couple weeks ago, I got 3 messages from people who know me and know somewhat of my work. And they had seen something, run into some work that I had done somewhere that they didn't know about. And they called me up in almost this kind of accusatory way and said, how come I didn't know you did this? And I think that that's kind of the philosophy behind this reciprocity, this way of being that creates Alabizu and Mamabizu, is that it's very quiet. It's a very quiet thing that people don't often even think about. You know, the fact that we in our communities are on a daily basis delivering breakfast, lunch, and dinner to community members, that elders are being shopped for in the community, that they're being provided with medicines to keep their immune system strong and their lungs healthy. The fact that we have 3 community gardens, one just for the elders, one for all community members, and one for the kids to learn how to connect with the soil. The food pantries that we have that distribute food to the entire community. But we also have, you know, a lot of people who carry on the traditions of people like my grandmother, who quietly go about making sure that everyone has what they need to be okay. And so it's not like this big flamboyant thing that needs to be on Facebook. It's not about being seen and being recognized. There's almost this element of, you know, I think of it as being like the giving equivalent to counting coup, right? That whole concept of counting coup was about being able to send a message to that perceived enemy, you know, by sneaking up on them and taking their horse or taking something of theirs and leaving something of yours in return, to say, I was close enough that I could have killed you, but I chose to honor the sacredness of your life, right? And it's just very quiet, and it's, you know, stealth. And so this is like the counting coup model of giving. That's so in opposition to the world we're living in today, where it's very quiet and it's stealthy. And, you know, making sure that our healthcare workers have PPE, not waiting on the government to make sure that they have what they need, but taking it upon ourselves to make sure that they have what they need. Making sure that everybody has something to, you know, there's a community prayer group that goes around with a big smudge bowl and in the back of a truck with drummers and singers and people who are praying, and they go through and they do the whole community, driving through really slow, singing songs and saying prayers and smudging the whole community. Yesterday I wasn't able to join because I had another commitment, but the women of the community came together and they drummed at the entrance to the community at a safe social distance and sang to everyone. And so there's all of these types of things that are just very subtle and very much a part of who we are, that happen naturally, that rise up naturally. And people often think, I have to plan some big, huge thing, right? Like I have to plan some big, huge thing where I'm going to go out and I'm going to do this stuff that everybody's going to, notice and that we'll get recognition for. And I think about this in relation to my daughter, when you're talking about your story of what you did with, reaching this number of homeless people. And I got a teaching by my own daughter because I was complaining one day that, I just got you stuff yesterday or 2 days ago for your lunches and everything's gone. What are you doing with all this food? And she, was kind of sheepish about it. And what I eventually found out was that she was taking a whole loaf of bread and making sandwiches and taking all her snack foods and making individual little packs. And she was taking them to school with her in her backpack. And at her lunch break, she would go out and hand them out to the homeless. But she didn't, feel the need for anybody to know about that, right? She didn't want me to know that she was doing that. And she talked about my grandmother, right? And about the stories that she had heard growing up and about the ways that my mother helped people and the ways that I helped people. And it's teaching that, passing that down. I think that is a part of that. That's important because you can't have an uprising like you're talking about of coming to the aid of those in need if people haven't been given that core compassion that's necessary to meet that moment in time. So I think that's it. So I have a question for you that I would like to ask you.
Just thank you so much. That was so beautiful. You made me cry. To imagine that all of this just could be ways of being in our communities is beautiful.
Yeah, and it's and it's simple, right? These are simple things that we can all do. And so the question I have for you is, as you're working on divesting from these systems and with this commitment to nonviolence, how do you become aware of the conquest aspects of your activism? So looking at conquest activism is something that I talk about all the time. I teach about because I think that what we've been taught is that we take care of problems through conquest. We conquer it, the battle of, whatever it is, whether it's the bulge or the war on drugs or the war on poverty, all of this other war language, right? It goes deeper than just the language because we've been indoctrinated with that way of being. How do you address activism in such a way to ensure that you're not engaging in an act of conquest against some other?
Thank you for that question. So at Code Pink, we're really aware of that. And I just want to say that those war metaphors you used are what the war economy uses to actually do the opposite of what they say they're doing. But at Code Pink, our goal is that everything we do is disarming. And so we work really hard at being disarming. And so not creating the structures that there's already enough of this. How do we do something that is outside of that? And that's why you see us in colorful costumes and being, where we raise up. We think that people we're not going to make the change. It's going to take everyone to make the change. And our job is to point out the violence. Right. So, you know, much of what we do is to expose violence. And I would say what, you know, like to make it concrete, we're in the back of a Senate hearing with a sign that tells the truth that you're not going to hear in the hearing. The press pick up that truth because, first of all, it's a photograph. Maybe it's something they're not willing to say. I can use an example of something they're not willing to say. In the back of the room, when Condi Rice came to ask for more money to bomb more Iraqi people, we sat in the back of that hearing room and raised our hands and had blood on our hands. So that's information, but it's information that nobody wants to talk about. And before we went into ceremony, we talked about why we were going, from the place in our heart that loves and cares, and that, you know, that empathy is missing in Congress, and that we needed to be there for that recognized the lives that tax dollars were destroying. So we did ceremony, and the librarian that was part of, you know, the group, she was sitting up front, and Condi Rice walked right by her, and she just took her red hands and put them like this near Condi Rice's face and said, "You have the blood of Iraqi children on your hands." Mm. And that picture went around the world. Now, that's not something the media is ever going to say, but that picture told the truth of what was true in that moment that nobody would say. So we feel like it's like, for us, it's the narrative. There's this narrative that we have to disrupt, because why did we go to war in Iraq? Because all these lies were told and people agreed to them, and they were all lies, even though we were constantly saying they were lies. And in the meantime, $5 trillion have been spent destroying the planet, countries, and people. So we really feel like constantly, like, what does this look like to be disarming? So another example is we were like a month-long hunger strike in a member of the Congress's office, Congressman Ackerman, a Democrat from New York. And he wasn't listening, and we were trying to stop an active war on Iran that was a blockade of the Persian Gulf. And on Friday, Nancy Pelosi said, "We're going to vote on that on Tuesday, and it's going to go through like a knife through hot butter." And that weekend, we found out Congressman Ackerman lived on a boat in DC, and Monday morning, we had little dinghies. Like, disarming is always at the core. So little flags, we create a blockade around his boat, and like, you know, beautiful little hats with peace signs and flags with peace signs. No war in Iraq, no war in Iran, no war in Iran. He came out at 7 a.m, totally laughing, like laughing his head off, met with us for an hour, and then, which he had refused to do for a month. And then we said, could you just meet with these Iranian students so you could understand what it means to Iranians, what you're about to do? At 2 o'clock he did, and at 2:30 he ripped up the bell. And I want to say Jen Vaughn is the core. It's so funny to be telling that story with Genevieve here, because she is at the core of that happening by, you know, really infusing us the capacity to do that work and to take on Iran, which we have not stopped taking on. Yes, we know that activism can be rooted in violence, and we strive very hard to model what that can look like as activism to inform, because things can only change with an informed people. And we have to get in the face of the lies, just like we are with China right now, where they're trying to drive us to the brink of a nuclear war with China over lies, a country that's taken 900 million people out of poverty and stopped COVID in the country, and has no aspirations for imperialism. The empire wants us to go to war with them.
Thank you. I think it's really important for us to think about that in a really deep way as we're doing whatever work it is we're doing in the world, because so many of our goals are to replace them with us. And that's how we perpetuate these cycles of conquest and violence. And, you know, we have to think about it in regard to the spiritual journey, that it's not about, killing off this aspect of ourselves. It's about stripping away what no longer serves us, integrating the lesson, and then cycling forward intact as a whole being. And since we're, you know, in the larger sense, one living being, all life is connected to one living being, we have to be thinking about our work in that way, because, you know, how do you move from transactional with a military industrial complex to transformative? How do you mobilize that body in a way that's not engendering war, but that is supporting a cooperative, peacetime, uplifting life for the rest of society? Because, you know, at the heart of that question is an economic question. How do those millions and millions of soldiers support their families if you do away with this business of war? And so how do we turn that transaction into something transformational is a question that needs to be really explored, I think, at depth.
We have lots of answers to that question, no problem. Yeah. There's way better jobs that are much less traumatic and more healing to the planet and the person and the world. Yes, we have, you know, whole conversations on that.
We have great answers to that. So I think that's going to be part of the discussion. You know? Right.
And, you know, we also have a lot of members of the military as part of our community, because they have witnessed, you know, what it is, and that there could be much better ways to be investing their lives. And, you know, also what's super tragic is that, you know, as we talk about life, here we are in a pandemic that has taken so many, and the carelessness with how we see people live, which makes me sad that is, you know, the conditions we have created for what life is. And then that there is so much violence that is perpetrated by our tax dollars, and not just to war. You know, in Congress, there's literally like a death quotient about how members decide they'll vote. And there's so many votes that happen that are like only so many people are going to die, instead of how does this nourish life for 7 generations? And, you know, the question always is about education. What are we taught? And you've said that so well, Sherri. It's like all of our jobs is really just to be, so that people can witness there's a way of being it, and that it is, you can thrive, and life thrives in that way. And then the responsibility to teach, and the discomfort that is, that, you know, first for us, you know, when you tell the truth, people hate you. And so you go through a lot of people hating you, and then, you know, knowing that it's the truth, you just keep going until there's enough people that resonate with it, that then that becomes an agreement. And I think that's all of our jobs, you know, that's why, you know, it's like there's so much that is needed for us to be the peace economy, for us to be the maternal gifter, to model what you're saying, Sherri, to just be moving in the world as a gift, that affects people.
Yeah. And I think you're right. I mean, one of the things I just put something forward recently that talks about that the standard operating procedure for our congressional leaders is not how do we move people forward in a loving and healthy way, but how much suffering, what is the degree of suffering that we're going to allow people to endure?
Exactly.
You allow them to endure a little bit of suffering, or are we going to allow them to endure a great amount of suffering? Who bears the brunt of that suffering? And how, you know, how do we stage the degrees of suffering and perhaps the duration of the suffering? Those are the questions that are foremost in the minds of congressional leaders. And we need to completely shift that narrative, right? Because a mother doesn't contemplate how much suffering she's going to allow her children to endure, a mother contemplates, how can I uplift and support the thriving of my children, right? And we need to be shifting the way that we're thinking and changing the view around that from, oh, aren't you cute, little lady? Let me pat you on the head, to this is a matter of survival for our species on the planet. The species that is at greatest risk of extinction right now is us, and it's suicidal ideation that's built into the culture that we have allowed to proliferate, and we have the ability to be able to change that.
Thank you so much, Sherri and Jodi. I'm actually shocked that we're almost to the end of our time together. Because I'm so engrossed and engaged in the conversation. For those of you viewing, we'll be having more salons every 2 weeks, and I personally hope that we can invite these two back for really an open dialogue, because that would be fruitful. To be able to have this time with them in this conversation again. So I want to thank you both for being with us and all the contributions that you've had. Genevieve, as we come to a close, is there anything that you'd like to say before I actually close us out and try to keep us on time in honor of everyone else's time?
No, I just want to say thank you so much, Jodi and Sherri. You've just been so clear and wonderful. And we're going to shift this paradigm and make it a much better society for the future, and end war and the war economy and all of the exploitation that's going on, and live in the gift of the mother. So
Thank you,
so
Jen.
much.
Yes.
Yes.
I want to remind you that if your question did not get answered, or if you have more questions that you would like to address to our speakers, please send them to us at the maternalgifteconomy@gmail.com. We'll be sure to make sure that our speakers get the questions that are directed to them, and that we take your questions very seriously to help us plan for our future salons. I want to remind you that on January the 16th, we're going to be having Dr. Heidi Gutner-Abendroth returning, and she's going to be speaking about the maternal politics and the practice of gift giving. Joining her is Barbara Mann. Her presentation title makes me laugh: Takes Two to Tango. The matriarchies of Indigenous America are built on the concept of mutuality, entwined twinship of blood. So water and land and breath, air, and spatiality. So it will be a wonderful experience to have both of them. They are co-editors of a maternal modern matriarchal bibliography. I think it's for Oxford or something. So the two of them have worked together, and I will have another lively conversation with them. Today's video is going to be posted as soon as possible. Many of you have asked for it again, to be able to share, to be able to take notes. Again, our website is maternalgifteconomymovement.org. So we want to thank you from the deepest place in our hearts for you joining us, for you sharing this information, so that we can literally bring this movement forward and break through in 2021. So with that, we're wishing you a wonderful weekend. Please stay safe and well. Take care of each other, and we'll see you again in 2 weeks. Bye for now. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks, Jen. Thanks, Sherri.
Thank you all so much. Yes, thank you, Jodi.
Thanks, Letitia.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye, Jen.